I was sitting down to a warm family dinner. Instead, I watched my own parents push my wheelchair-bound grandpa into the freezing night, entirely stripped of his dignity. When I stepped in front of him to stop them, my father lashed out, striking me across the face before throwing me out into the cold right alongside him. We were left on the icy pavement with nothing but the clothes on our backs, shivering in the dark while my family celebrated inside. My parents thought they had completely broken us, leaving us with no money, no shelter, and no hope. They smiled as they locked the door, thinking they had secured the family fortune for themselves. They had no idea that Grandpa had been testing them, and his real will was about to change absolutely everything. My name is Mary. I am 26 years old, and for the last few years, I've been working around the clock just to build a life I could be proud of on my own terms. I never wanted to rely on my family, and looking back at that fateful evening, I thank God I didn't. It was Christmas Eve, and the snow was coming down heavily outside my parents' upscale, pristine suburban mansion. On the surface, everything looked like a postcard. The glittering tree, the expensive decorations, the smell of roasted dinner. But inside, the air was thick with a suffocating, hostile tension. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, their eyes darting coldly toward the end of the room where my grandfather, Arthur, sat quietly in his wheelchair. Grandpa's health had been failing over the past year, and his mobility issues meant he required constant care. Instead of showing him compassion, my parents treated his presence like an insulting, heavy burden. They dropped their masks of holiday cheer, their voices dripping with bitter resentment as they openly complained about the space and expenses he was costing them. As I sat there sensing the hostility, I wondered how far greed could push a family. Before I tell you what the city you're watching from so I can see how far our community reaches. I watched my father lean forward, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. My father slid a piece of paper across the table, stopping it right in front of Grandpa Arthur's trembling hands. The room fell completely silent, save for the crackling of the fireplace. Richard didn't even look his own father in the eye as he spoke, his voice cold and demanding. He told Grandpa that it was time to sign over the rights to his remaining bank accounts and the deed to his old house to pay for his upkeep and compensate them for the burden of his medical care. Eleanor nodded along in agreement, her eyes filled with cold calculation as she pressed a pen into Grandpa's hand. But Grandpa Arthur didn't flinch. He quietly set the pen down, looked up at them with absolute dignity, and firmly said, "No." He told them the money was already meant for something else, and that he wouldn't let them take it. The rejection completely broke my father's composure. Infuriated, Richard slammed his fists onto the table, stood up, and violently grabbed the handles of Grandpa's wheelchair. He began wheeling him straight toward the front door, shouting that if Grandpa wouldn't contribute, he could find somewhere else to sleep. Horrified, I jumped up from my seat and threw myself directly in front of the door to protect my grandfather. "Stop this. He's your father," I screamed. In a blind fit of rage, Richard lunged forward and struck me across the face, the force of the blow sending me crashing into the wall. Before I could even process the pain, Eleanor grabbed my arms, unlocked the heavy front door, and violently threw me out onto the icy porch right alongside Grandpa. The door slammed shut behind us, locking with a definitive click. The freezing wind cut right through my clothes as I scrambled to my feet on the icy porch. My cheek burned from the strike, but the sheer panic washing over me quickly numbed the physical pain. Grandpa Arthur was shivering violently in his wheelchair, the thin fabric of his shirt offering absolutely no protection against the biting winter storm. We had no phones, no money, and the dark night offered no shelter. Gathering all my strength, I grabbed the handles of the wheelchair and began pushing Grandpa down the slick, icy driveway. Every step was a battle against the freezing sleet, my shoes slipping on the black ice as the howling wind threatened to knock us over. Hypothermia was setting in rapidly. My fingers were completely numb, and Grandpa's breathing grew dangerously shallow. I cried out for help, but my voice was completely swallowed by the roaring blizzard. Just as my legs began to give out from exhaustion and despair, two bright headlights cut through the blinding snow. A luxury sedan slowed down and pulled over right next to the curb. The door flew open, and a man rushed out into the storm. It was Harold, a longtime family friend and a prominent local lawyer who was driving home from his own holiday gathering. He gasped in horror when he recognized us, immediately wrapping Grandpa in a thick blanket and helping us both into his warm vehicle. As we sat shivering in the back seat, Grandpa Arthur weakly squeezed my hand, smiled, and whispered that this night wasn't our end, but the beginning of the truth. The very next morning, Harold drove us to a quiet, secure commercial district in Midtown. We pulled up to a modest, but highly secure private law office that looked entirely different from the flashy firms my parents usually frequented. Grandpa Arthur sat up straight in his wheelchair, the frailty from the night before seemingly vanished, replaced by an intense, sharp look in his eyes. As we settled into the private conference room, Grandpa looked at my bewildered face and finally revealed the truth. He explained that he had been playing a long, highly calculated game. He was never broke, nor was he ever truly helpless. He had spent the last 2 years pretending to be penniless and physically dependent just to test my parents and see the true colors of his greedy children. Harold stepped forward and unrolled a thick, official legal binder from his briefcase, setting the heavy documents on the desk. This wasn't just a basic estate file. It contained certified banking records, global investment certificates, and property titles. Looking closely at the legal records, the true scale of Grandpa's secret life became clear. He wasn't just comfortable, he was a billionaire. The official documents revealed that Arthur was the sole owner of a massive, sweeping real estate empire consisting of 100 high-end commercial properties and a staggering $1.1 billion protected trust fund. I stared at the numbers in absolute disbelief as Grandpa smiled warmly at me, ready to execute his final move. Grandpa Arthur leaned forward, his voice steady as he explained the precise trap he had laid for my parents. He had officially updated his legally binding final, just 6 weeks prior to this very day, ensuring everything was airtight. He explained that the entire $1.1 billion fortune, along with the massive real estate portfolio, was being left solely to me. However, he had engineered a highly specific legal poison pill aimed directly at Richard and Eleanor. In the updated documents, Grandpa technically gifted them full ownership of the multi-million-dollar family mansion they currently lived in, making it look like a generous parting gift on the surface. But there was a catch. What my parents didn't know was that Grandpa had secretly leveraged the property heavily over the past year. The mansion was now tied to a massive corporate lien and millions of dollars in hidden, accumulated back taxes that Grandpa had purposefully kept active and attached to the deed. By law, the moment my parents signed the papers to officially accept ownership of the estate, they would automatically and unknowingly assume every single penny of that crushing financial liability. Because they had no liquid assets of their own to cover a debt of that magnitude, the inheritance wouldn't make them rich. It was a legal ticking time bomb designed to strip them of everything they owned the exact second they tried to claim it. 2 weeks later, the day of reckoning arrived inside Martin Morrison's polished corporate office. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, strutted into the room with smug, arrogant smiles plastered across their faces. They looked at me like I was a piece of trash, completely convinced they were about to officially sweep up the remaining pieces of Grandpa's estate and cement their absolute control over his wealth. I sat calmly on the opposite side of the long mahogany table, my hands folded, while Harold opened his briefcase. The atmosphere shifted from arrogant satisfaction to heavy confusion when Harold announced that a final, updated will had been executed just weeks before Arthur's passing. My parents scowled, but their arrogance remained intact as Harold began reading the transfer documents for the primary mansion. Believing they had finally won the grand prize, Richard and Eleanor eagerly snatched the pen from Harold's hand and signed the legal acceptance papers. They smiled triumphantly, looking over at me with sheer pity. But their celebration lasted all of 5 seconds. Their high-priced corporate defense attorney picked up the fully signed documents, flipped to the attached financial disclosures, and went entirely pale. His hands began to shake violently, and the air completely left the room. Richard frowned, demanding to know what was wrong. The lawyer stammered, his voice cracking as he delivered the devastating blow. He explained that they hadn't inherited a fortune at all. By signing those papers, they had just legally assumed a massive, unpayable corporate lien and millions in immediate back taxes. They were completely bankrupt. The legal trap snapped shut with absolute precision, and the financial ruin that followed was swift and devastating. My parents were forced to liquidate their expensive cars, their country club memberships, and every single asset they possessed just to keep themselves out of prison for the massive back taxes. They lost their high social standing, their dignity, and the very mansion they had committed assault to protect, ending up completely broke because of their own unbridled greed. Meanwhile, Grandpa Arthur and I moved into a beautiful, peaceful estate by the coast, surrounded by the healing sound of the ocean. I used my newly inherited $1.1 billion fortune to establish a national foundation dedicated entirely to protecting vulnerable, elderly individuals from financial abuse and emotional manipulation. It was the exact legacy Grandpa wanted to leave behind. Greed strips away our humanity, but loyalty preserves it. What would you have done if you were in my... Check out the 2 videos on your screen right now for more incredible stories of justice. Thank you for watching.